If global food imports stopped tomorrow, two countries sharing the world's longest border would face very different fates. Canada produces 1.5% of the world's food while housing only 0.5% of its population. The math already tells a story. These 5 structural advantages explain why Canada is quietly better positioned than its southern neighbour to weather a food crisis. Stretching from Manitoba to Alberta, Canada's Prairie's heartland forms one of the world's most productive agricultural zones. Here the numbers tell a clear story. For every 1,000 Canadians, there are 20.25 square kilometres of farmable land. That's more than 1.5 times the United States figure of 13.65. On a per-person basis, Canada offers 0.95 hectares of arable land, over twice the American average. The difference becomes even more striking when looking at seeded area. Canadian farms plant 2,511 acres per 1,000 people, nearly triple the United States rate. Much of this capacity is concentrated in the prairies, where a single family farm often spans 800 acres or more. These operations are not just large, they are built for scale, with grain silos, modern machinery and direct access to rail lines that move wheat, canola and pulses across the continent. In a crisis, that scale matters. With fewer people competing for each hectare, Canada's food supply can stretch further, and farms can pivot quickly from export crops to staple foods for local tables. Contrast this with the United States, where more people depend on each acre, and farm debt now tops $500 billion. Smaller average farm sizes and a denser network of ownership mean less flexibility if supply lines fail. In Canada, the surplus land per person acts as a safety net, a buffer that can be converted into calories when imports disappear. The sheer space of the prairies, backed by efficient transport and lower financial strain, gives Canada a built-in insurance policy against global shocks. Winter in most of Canada is more than just a season. It serves as a natural extension of the food supply chain. For centuries, Indigenous communities and early European settlers relied on the deep cold to stretch harvests through the lean months. Root cellars, often dug below the frost line or into permafrost, could keep potatoes, carrots and turnips fresh well into spring, even when outside temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. This passive storage method required no electricity, only an understanding of the land and its cycles. Today, the tradition continues in new forms. Modern distribution centres and transport routes across Canada still benefit from the ambient cold. A shipment of lettuce leaving southern Ontario in January, bound for the Gulf of Mexico, can travel 55 hours by truck and rail. For most of that journey, outside air temperatures remain below 10 degrees, slowing spoilage and reducing the need for powered refrigeration. This natural cold chain effect means that even during energy disruptions, much of Canada's perishable food can be preserved longer than in warmer regions. The difference becomes clear during blackouts. In 2003, when a massive outage hit the northeast, Toronto's main grocery distribution centre maintained safe temperatures for nearly 2 days, thanks to the building's thermal mass and the cold outside air. By contrast, in New York, where the average temperature was 12 degrees, major retailers lost millions as produce spoiled within 24 hours. In a prolonged crisis, Canada's climate offers an extra layer of protection. Winter's chill becomes a strategic buffer that keeps food viable, even when the power goes out. Canada's population is spread thinly across a vast landscape, just 4 people per square kilometre, compared to 36 in the United States. This low density changes how food moves from farms to tables. In Canada, most regional distribution centres are built close to both production zones and the communities they serve. The majority of arable land, over 70%, is situated within efficient rail corridors, allowing bulk crops to move quickly and reliably, even if one route faces disruption. These rail lines connect directly to grain elevators and processing hubs, minimizing the distance food travels before reaching local markets. In contrast, American supply chains must navigate dense urban corridors where megacities like New York, Los Angeles and Chicago act as choke points. More than 30% of the United States population lives in these sprawling urban centres, creating heavy demand on a few critical highways and rail lines. When a crisis disrupts trucking or rail service, these bottlenecks can leave millions waiting for deliveries. In Canada, food distribution remains more elastic. The last mile, the final stretch from distribution centre to consumer, tends to be shorter and less congested, with rural and suburban areas often just a few hours from major supply nodes. This spatial advantage means fewer points of failure and greater flexibility to reroute shipments during emergencies. With most people living within reach of regional supply, Canada's food logistics are designed to absorb shocks, while the United States system faces greater risks of gridlock when demand surges or transport is interrupted. Canada's water reserves shape its ability to weather a food crisis in ways that are difficult to match. Nearly a fifth of the world's surface freshwater flows through the Great Lakes Basin, a resource that Canada shares but holds in abundance. This endowment reaches deep into the country's agricultural heartland, providing stable irrigation reserves even during multi-year droughts. By comparison, the United States draws heavily on groundwater, with agriculture accounting for over 40% of all freshwater withdrawals nationwide. In the High Plains, the Ogallala Aquifer has lost up to 3 meters of saturated thickness per decade in the most stressed areas, leaving some states facing declining crop yields and mounting uncertainty. Canada's agricultural sector uses only about 11% of the country's total water withdrawals, a figure that reflects both natural rainfall patterns and efficient irrigation. The value produced per cubic metre of water in Canadian fields averages roughly 25 cents, nearly double the United States average. This efficiency is rooted in precision irrigation, soil management, and cooler climates that slow evaporation. In a scenario where imports vanish, the ability to scale up water-intensive crops without draining reserves becomes a force multiplier. While the United States faces mounting pressure from depleted aquifers and competition with urban needs, Canada's freshwater cushion acts as a throttle, allowing production to accelerate or pivot as conditions demand. The difference is not just in quantity, but in the capacity to sustain output when global supplies run thin. Canada's role as a global food exporter becomes a powerful safeguard when international supply lines falter. Each year, Canada sends out more wheat, canola, and pulses than its population could ever consume, with exports making up about 20% of the country's total food output. In 2020, Canada supplied 96% of all canola oil imported by the United States and 85% of the potash fertilizer used on American fields. Potash, a mineral vital for crop yields, underpins grain and corn production across the Midwest. Without steady access to this Canadian supply, harvests in the United States would struggle to maintain current volumes. The leverage extends beyond commodities. When border blockades in 2022 delayed shipments, disruptions rippled through North American supply chains within days. Canadian railways and highways, built for export, can be redirected to feed domestic markets if needed. Meanwhile, the United States faces a dependency it cannot quickly replace. Its own farm sector relies on Canadian fertilizer and oilseeds to keep production stable. In a scenario where borders close or trade is restricted, Canada's export surplus and control over key agricultural inputs become lifelines for its own population, while the United States faces a cascade of shortages and rising costs. When a sudden halt to global food imports hits North America, the differences between Canada and the United States become impossible to ignore. In the United States, dense cities and sprawling suburbs draw heavily on just-in-time supply chains, each link stretched thin by concentrated demand and shrinking buffers. As railways and highways clog with stalled deliveries, supermarket shelves empty in days, not weeks. The scramble for key inputs like fertilizer intensifies, with American farmers watching as potash shipments slow to a trickle and prices spike. Water scarcity compounds the shock. Aquifers in the High Plains drop further, irrigation cutbacks slash yields, and attempts to ramp up production run headlong into physical and logistical limits. North of the border, the same shock unfolds along a different path. Canadian prairie farms with surplus land and grain already stored in massive silos redirect exports inward. Distribution centres spaced across a low-density landscape remain supplied by rail lines that bypass urban bottlenecks. The cold air preserves perishables as energy grids strain. Water reserves drawn from the Great Lakes and stable aquifers keep irrigation running even as global flows slow. Fertiliser stocks built on domestic potash cushion the blow. The system absorbs the hit, stretching reserves and shifting supply chains toward local needs. While both countries face turbulence, Canada's structural buffers slow the cascade, buying time as the United States system spirals toward acute shortages. The divergence is no longer theoretical. It unfolds in real time, shaped by geography, infrastructure, and the quiet math of resilience. Today, global supply chains remain fragile and resource pressures keep rising. Structural resilience isn't abstract, it's a matter of national security. Geography and policy shape who eats when crisis hits. In a world of tightening margins, the difference between vulnerability and stability is no longer hypothetical. What would you bet on?